Hi, I'm Jesse Hirsh, and I'm here with my friend Allan Gregg for another kick-ass episode of Red-Tory. At the end of history, it kind of seems like we're right back into a geopolitical crisis in which economics, class, crypto are all kind of part of the mix. And, you know, Allan, I don't know if it's serendipity or if it's convenience, but this is the second episode in a row where major news breaks right before we get together. So what are you paying attention to, Allan?
Well, you can't not be paying attention to this. And the irony, again, something that we both talked about, and you especially, is the announcements made this afternoon that tariffs are coming tomorrow. And, you know, the dollar goes into the dumper, the stock market loses, full point and a half. That the wishful thinking that was going on, that somehow there would have going to be another extension, or, you know, as the Secretary of Commerce kind of hinted the other day, that maybe they would be lower than 25%, and then it comes and it's a holy shit moment for those who purportedly are kind of, you know, on top of the markets and understand everything that's going on. So how much, you know, and again, the markets, you can never tell because the markets have their own kind of brain.
Yeah, and biases.
Yes, whether this is the start of something much, much worse, or as we often see in the markets, the reaction to something that happens absolutely in the moment.
Yeah.
And once the moment is past, the reaction is gone. So It's hard to tell. We'll just have to watch.
Yeah. And to that latter point, it's partly because a lot of this is mathematical. A lot of it's algorithms. So they've priced in what the cost of the decision is. And it pretty much is instantly corrected and then stabilizes sort of moving forward. I mean, I had a hunch that this was going to come through. And to your point about the markets, it seemed totally it just didn't make sense to me that we wouldn't have this kind of bleeding, that we wouldn't have this kind of chaos. And I've kind of come to a hypothesis, and we'll get into the crypto stuff in a bit, but there's a part of me, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this, that their primary constituency, and I don't mean billionaires, right? I fundamentally mean millionaires. I mean, you know, business owners who have a certain level of insulation that if the price of eggs goes up 4 times, they don't care. If a car goes up twice in price, they don't care. If some products go up 4 times in price, they don't care, especially if there's a moral righteousness that comes with it. That this is something we're doing for the greater good, for the economy. Our boy is in office. He's, you know, taking care of us. And versus everyone else in society, those cost increases are existential, right? They hurt really bad. So is it possible that we are just seeing such a bifurcated society that the economic impacts of such radical decisions are felt so unevenly that the true constituency of this government could be like, yeah, I can handle this. It's not a big deal.
Well, it's hard to tell because the reasons that Trump has offered as to why tariffs are a good thing are both so multiple and so incomprehensible. You don't know what these guys are buying into. So if they're buying into the notion is that the income from tariffs will fund the continuation of the tax cut, which benefits exactly the class that you're talking about, then yes, there's an irrational kind of calculation there. If they're buying into the argument, well, America's been treated unfair by all our trading partners, and it's time to get even, then you can see how that goes much more to the MAGA base. How that applies to Canada, you're hard-pressed to understand. I mean, we know there's a bias in the United States among the MAGA class towards Mexicans. I mean, we heard that in 2015 when Donald Trump announced his candidacy, that rapists were coming across. Maybe some good people, but mostly rapists coming from Mexico. So it's hard to tell. I haven't seen, you know, any public opinion data that tries to disaggregate all of the rationale as to why tariffs might be a good thing or why they might be an appropriate thing, and to see what slivers or segments of the constituencies out there might embrace what kind of arguments. But I say there's so much there. There's something for everyone if you're that way so inclined.
I think you're projecting a bit in assuming that there's a rational element here. I think one of the underpinning elements of an authoritarian society is the leader is good. Whatever the leader says, that is the best for society. And the extent to which the Newsmax and even Fox News, let alone the social media side to this, justifies any policy position he has with logic that's made up after the fact and can then be spewed forth by the faithful. I think the wealthy, for the most part, are educated enough to see through that shit. And, that's where, to your point, they may be looking at the tax cut, right? Or
their own self-interest rather than, as we talked about before, masculinity being on the ballot in an uncertain environment where the population feels incredibly vulnerable. They are looking for that authoritarianism. They're looking for that strong decisiveness, almost regardless of what it is.
The research,
declaring the United States an English language speaking country. I mean,
well, that's to your point about that in Mexico. This is where the white supremacy is undeniably coursing through this administration.
But again, talk about a solution for which no one really sees a particular problem. I mean, but you're absolutely right.
Well, but hold on, I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole here.
That notion that I have a definitive solution here, it almost doesn't matter what the solution is. I'm actually agreeing with you here.
Yeah,
that he just throws that stuff out, and it makes him look strong, and the strength is in fact what gravitates the electorate towards it.
Yeah.
Although there is some evidence that that's starting to fall apart a little bit. Anyway, we're jumping all over here.
Well, and that's all right. That's what podcasts are all about. The great replacement theory is something that these people believe in. Hence why the white supremacy, unfortunately, is tied to a kind of perverse logic that they have. But there's fascinating anthropological research out of, I'm pretty sure, not Northwestern University, the university in Chicago, the really prestigious.
It's Northwestern, yeah.
Yeah, so it is Northwestern, on the January 6th insurgents, on the people who were arrested and charged, because because it's in the public domain. It allows them to really go in and look at who these people are. They're overwhelmingly business owners. Like, they're overwhelmingly people who are relatively affluent, who, while we are very much concerned about the working class who vote for Trump, it is often the more affluent who are the foot soldiers, who are the ones who are motivated to take action, who have the privilege to go to DC to take action. And I think that when we talk about MAGA, we have to remember that it is a combination. Like, it isn't Hillary Clinton was wrong when she said the deplorables, right?
Deplorables.
No, you're
absolutely
it's a diverse group.
Yeah, and that unto itself adds to our confusion in terms of our inability to understand, because not only is the Trump, forget the MAGA base, the Trump base, incredibly diverse. Many component parts actually have their best vested interest in contrast and against other component parts, and that kind of linkage is virtually never made.
Although where you correctly identify the stresses in those links and anticipate, I think correctly, that they are going to fall apart. I think there's two core constituencies that we are now seeing in the policies that are being served. We're talking about one, which is the wealthy, and I don't mean the super wealthy. I mean the modestly wealthy. And then the other is the nerd class, and we'll come to the nerd class in a bit. But I think that those two pillars, this regime believes, is enough to base their power upon, and they're hoping that the effect of propaganda will keep the rest as part of the tent. Will keep the rest believing whatever bullshit that they're peddling. Well, but the tariff thing, to say one last thing about the tariffs, I don't really see much logic here other than executive power. Like, to me, this play still fundamentally is part of the logic of let us do everything we can to consolidate power into the executive. And this is a powerful, disruptive policy that he can do as the executive. And I don't think domestically there's any logic. And I think the only logic for Canada, he wants to take us over. But other than that, from a policy level, I think this is just designed to get attention.
First, to your point about the constituency, if that's all they're worried about is the nerd class and the wealthy, then that's good news for Democrats, because that would leave them open on blue collar workers, which is the absolute foundation that has crumbled apart of the Democratic base. I mean, in the last election, they did also have an erosion among Latino and Black voters, but it's the blue collar voters that have really abandoned the Democratic Party, and the party knows that, and they know why it's abandoned. And so, if the extent to which they can develop a concerted effort to develop a strategy to recapture those, they have a chance of at least getting close. On the grab for executive power, you're right to the extent that this is a big thing he can do under various and sundry acts that go back to the 60s, arguably some of them even before that, where executive power can overrule the need for congressional approval. So that is absolutely right. Where, again, they may be miscalculated. And I talked about this a little bit, but not perhaps as much as I should, because I don't see this analysis that frequently in a lot of the business coverage. I mean, they complain that they have a trade deficit with virtually every country in the world, which is what they do, but not so much on services, but on goods. And the reason for that is they consume more goods than they produce. So the extent to which countries are either going to withhold those goods, they're going to have an internal inflation pressure, supply and demand, no more complicated than that. The extent to which they add price that has to be passed along, because we've talked about this, 60% of all those goods that are imported are processed, they're raw materials that are processed by American manufacturing. You're going to see a whole other parallel vein of inflation. And inflation will exacerbate that blue collar support. So maybe, again, we're kind of wishful thinking here, but I don't think they've got this. And listen,
What do you mean by wishful thinking, though? To which part? That the working class are going to get fucked?
No.
Because that's clear.
To the extent that, it's wishful thinking on our part that this actually could create an opening. It's
agreed. Okay, agreed. Yeah. Like, we're hoping that the Democrats get their head out of their ass, and they're starting to, but for them to become a working class party would mean empowering Bernie and AOC and some of the left part of the Democratic Party. And I'm not sure they're there yet. But I agree with all the economic analysis. The working class in America is about to experience real pain. Real, and whether to your point, the only larger rationalization, which I could believe them believing, is that this will reshore manufacturing, that this will get American industry created. And I just don't see the logistics of how that's going to happen, at least in a lot of certain industries. And, for example, they have spent, Biden mostly, billions and billions of dollars trying to reshore semiconductor manufacturing.
Yes.
Because of its national security implications. And they're struggling to do so. And Intel is on the verge of bankruptcy. So their desire to make these things happen does not make them happen. But the direct consequences of these policies will be a really difficult time for anyone who I would say is middle class or lower in America. And that's got to have an impact.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It's very, very hard for them to reshore major manufacturing sectors just because of the logistical. There's some sectors, trucking, for example, could move across the border quite easily and forego the Canadian marketplace in exchange for a tariff-free U.S. Market. You don't do the math. 25% times a population is 10 times bigger. That's good economics. But I mean, it's hard to know. I mean, then there's Canada's reaction. I mean, we've been claiming that we're ready to retaliate at any second. That there's a tit for tat. You've written a Substack piece that says, not good enough. I mean, if we really want to show these guys that they're dealing with someone who is a real potential opponent in this, we've got to get way more draconian.
Well, and Mike Myers was on Saturday Night Live
Yeah,
this past weekend, and at the end of the show, in the credits, his whole message was, elbows up, Canadians,
yeah.
right? Like,
Charlie Angus, our friend, wrote a very good piece about that in the reference to Gordie Howe.
yeah,
Also, who'd go on the ice of the Detroit Red Wings, and people would come out with no teeth and black eyes.
yeah, and I think across the country there is, not so much a militancy, but a real sense of, a combination of pride and scrappiness. Now, I wrote that piece partly because I wanted to go back into our argument
You
about
want to
radical policies.
stir some shit up. Yes.
Yeah. I wanted to move the Overton window so that some of the more moderate stuff, like a national electric grid, starts becoming sensible.
Right.
But the biggest response I've gotten from people, and the post has, in my modest way, gone viral on Substack, and that Substack is promoting it across the platform, is everyone saying, yeah, I'd rather Canada not put tariffs and just label stuff. And it was both, I think, a materialist approach where people are like, yeah, I don't want higher prices. But it was also a mature approach saying we can make up our own minds. Like, we have the ability to say, yeah, that's American, I don't want to buy that. And it was that type of approach in which we're saying, yes, let's take a stand. Let's take a radical stand. My argument was even, we are at pre-war terms. We should anticipate war and therefore, hack U.S. equipment. But the responses all focused on we don't want those tariffs. We would rather have labeling. Labeling allows us as consumers to make our choice. I wasn't expecting that response from people. I put that in there just as like not looking like a total radical, but turns out that's what resonated.
The Mexicans have a major initiative underway right now. Now it's not so much "Don't buy America," but it's branding and labeling Mexican product.
Yeah,
and it's been just announced by Scheinbaum, and it's well underway. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah. Now, interestingly, on the other side, there is the general people shouldn't go to Florida for March break conversation. And what's interesting there is, of course, Doug Ford is heading off to Florida for his annual vacation. And these are the types of things that are paid for in advance. But I'm curious as to whether there will be an impact on vacation and travel overall.
The first time in recent history that there is actually more Americans coming to Canada than Canadians going to America across border in January of this year. I haven't seen February data yet. So that's definitely happening. Whether, it's going to happen in kind of such a wholesale fashion, I doubt that, because of the very practical reasons that you say. I mean, I have a son that lives in Los Angeles. I'll still visit him.
Yeah.
But is there a strong nationalist sentiment right now that says we should get our elbows up? We should punish America's. I'm angry at what's going on, and that I want to demonstrate that anger in a way that is tangible and real, not just in terms of ranting and raving. I think that's very much the case right now.
Well, and part of the purpose of the piece I wrote was to be strategic, to anticipate what comes next, to rather than constantly reacting, take a more proactive stance. So before we move on to crypto, which is inherently speculative, let me see if I can speculate on where you think this could go. And still, obviously, within our own rational terms. But we have to be thinking at least a few steps ahead of this, because this is clearly, I am increasingly thinking this is not some random stuff. There is a larger strategy at work here.
Well, I want to talk about part of the article, and I know you're doing it to just stir shit up, and you say, let's nationalize the Magnificent Seven. I don't even think that's.
And spell that out for people who don't know who you're referring to.
This is Amazon, Meta, it's the Google, it's the whole. And there's no question that this administration, and to some extent also the Biden administration, feels an obligation to protect those major industries in foreign territory. There's no question. And that in many foreign territories, especially in Europe right now, there's a concerted effort to not so much nationalization, but antitrust, to break these guys up, to not allow them to have the monopoly or the non-competitive advantage that they have over, and not just domestic, but industries in total. And as I say, while nationalizing these businesses is impossible for any single nation to do because they're multinational.
Wait, you have to let me respond to that, though. Continue.
We did see the government of Quebec tell Amazon to basically get out of the province when they refused to accept the prospect of being unionized. And that is very, very real. I mean, we have, already, you can't buy more than 10% of a bank in this country. You can't buy more than 25% of a railroad. You can't buy a majority interest in an airline. Governments are sovereign. We can let dogs vote if we so choose. And the government has in its power to basically disable these businesses, not to nationalize them, but certainly to disable them in their operation in this country. Ready to go that far?
What, disable them?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. But to go back to my point about nationalization, it's absolutely possible. And I put that ludicrous idea in there in the hopes that somebody somewhere would take the bait and either A, trust you're arguing, say that it's impossible, which it's definitely not, but also
it
to float.
Is.
No. And again, you got to give me a moment,
yes.
And we won't take too much time because we have other things to discuss. But it's also because it's there in correlation to another cause, which is hacking. Because if we're talking about software entities, and all of these, even to a large extent Amazon, are software entities, then nationalization fundamentally involves a kind of hacking. Now, to take a tangent, because someone did post a comment and say, well, what about ExxonMobil, right? What about the energy infrastructure that ExxonMobil owns in Canada? Shouldn't we nationalize that? And I was like, all right, yeah, great point, right? So if you were to nationalize ExxonMobil in Canada, you're only nationalizing the operations that they have within the country, right? So the operations that they have outside of the country, you can't touch that, right? That's the limits of a sovereign entity. But you could take over their pipeline, you could take over their refinery, you could take over their operations in the tar sands, right? That is within the national powers of a sovereign entity. The same thing applies to the digital services. It would be tricky. You'd only be getting a piece of them, right? Like in the case of Meta, which of all of them is the most slippery, you'd be getting maybe 1% of their total operations. And to your point, it would be the operations they have in Canada, but you're forgetting that with digital entities, part of their power is their domain name, facebook.com. Part of the way is how they route messages on WhatsApp. And a national entity would have the ability that if anyone in their jurisdiction went to facebook.com, you didn't go to Meta's Facebook, you went to Jesse's Facebook, which had, all this pro-Canadian propaganda. And I'm being absurdist because this is an absurdist policy idea, but my point is technically very possible. Amazon, if you were to seize Amazon's facilities in Canada, you'd not only be getting access to warehouses, robots, software, and the goods that are in the facility, but you could then reverse engineer that and claim all the intellectual property that Amazon uses to run their operations. So again, I'm thinking like the Central Communist Party in China and how they would do it there. But This is why I'm saying, while politically impossible, technically very possible. And that's why I'm putting it out there as a concept, because it is on the table of options. Shall we talk about crypto? Because crypto is even crazier.
No, I'm going to take the last word on this.
Go ahead.
You have to seize their assets. You want to do it like Communist China, you do it like Communist China with the army.
Yeah.
You want to have an invasion from America, that's exactly what would trigger it.
And that was the point. That was the point. The point of the article was that all of those policies would trigger an invasion. And, to your point about the military, in China, in North Korea, in Iran, and also in America, the military has hacking units that would be able to go in and seize all these facilities. So all of this is under the concept of war. All of this is under the concept that an invasion is imminent and that all of these, like Tesla vehicles, could be used as bombs, as incendiary devices, right? Because they could literally program the lithium battery to explode. All of this is technically possible, and none of this is being discussed as part of the policy environment. And I'm saying I think we should be anticipating war, because I think that's how badly these guys covet Canada. And
Well,
I'm happy to be proven wrong. But I'm saying this now because I suspect it's happening. Now, the even crazier subject is crypto, right? Because everything I've talked about exists in material reality, and crypto is fundamentally a hallucination. And that is why the news around this a national crypto reserve is unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. I'd love to hear you describe it first, because I think you would be much closer to, you know, both the policy language and the news language, versus I will inherently describe this with my own cognitive bias in this regard, which is very anti-crypto.
Well, the same way there is a fiat or a dollar reserve, it's there to basically assure investors that the bonds they buy or the currencies that they buy will be supported, that there's sufficient, in this instance, cash to make good on the obligation that the lender has given the buyer. So that's the whole notion. Going back to Alexander Hamilton, this is how your currency continues to flow and have liquidity, because of that trust that is supported by a reserve. As you note, I mean, that cryptocurrency, like a dollar, is completely a concept. There's no inherent value in cryptocurrency. There's no inherent value in the dollar. The only value is that the person who has it in their pocket trusts that someone is going to give them $1 worth of something for it. That doesn't exist right now with cryptos. You can take your crypto, you can take your Bitcoin to Circle C and try to buy a Coca-Cola, and they won't take it from you. So an attempt, I would think, and again, you're much more into the technical side of this, it's an attempt to basically offer that same kind of assurance to the cryptocurrency markets that the Federal Reserve extends to the fiat currencies. And again, naming which of these currencies are going to be part of this reserve, including 3 I'd never heard of before in my life, and then watching the value of those 3 currencies just skyrocket in minutes is, you know, even for the uninitiated like myself, very alarming.
And the other thing, before we get into it, on a technical level, the other thing worth mentioning for people who are unfamiliar with cryptocurrency markets and how they work, they're radically transparent. Like, you can see almost all of the market activity in real time. And there were a lot of insider trades in this particular instance. There were a lot of people who put in positions in advance of the policy announcement, knowing full well what the effect of that announcement would have on the price.
And because Bitcoin had a big drop.
All of them did.
30%, yes.
Yes. All the crypto. So all the crypto, as soon as Trump came into power in November, crypto's been going up.
Right.
And it went up for a few months, and then Bitcoin started to come down progressively because a lot of people took their winnings, right? Because it had gone up. You sell when it's high, you buy when it's low. But the big moves in the last week, especially over the weekend, and I don't mean the insider trading, I mean the open market, were the ETFs, the cryptocurrency ETFs, which allow hedge funds basically to buy into cryptocurrency easily. They were all selling
retail investors can buy the ETFs too now.
So they were all selling their position, not anticipating this move. What they were doing was they were anticipating that the stock market was going to crash, right, because of tariffs, and they were assuming that crypto would as well. And they've been liquidating their positions because, again, it's a transparent market. The analysts have been talking about who's been making these plays. So before the announcement, there were 2 major institutional moves. The ETFs getting their money out for reasons of the tariffs, and insiders putting a ton of money, ton of leveraged money in, because they believed that there was going to be a major reversal. These are the insider traders. And then, of course, to your point, as soon as the announcements were made, Bitcoin went up, but so did Solana, so did XRP, so did the other currencies that were named, which these insiders bet on. Go ahead.
Who are these insiders?
So I'm going to give you the abridged.
Right.
Well, no. So the insiders, nobody knows. When I say transparent market, I don't mean easy to identify individuals.
Right.
I mean transparent in the sense of
you can see the transaction being made.
Yes, and you can see where the transaction goes, but you don't know who controls that digital wallet. And anyone can create a wallet at any time, and sophisticated people would own thousands of wallets, right? So you don't necessarily know who, but as a tangent, North Korea hacked Solana. It was partly Solana, but it was an exchange, a $1.5 billion hack of Ethereum and Solana off of an exchange 2 weeks ago. I wrote an issue on it. And the reason that everyone knows it's North Korea is because they've been monitoring these wallets forever. And the U.S. intelligence community monitors these wallets, so it knows it's them. So to your answer of who these insiders are, we don't know now, but we will know eventually, right? Because they've been marked and that money will be followed. And when they come out, people are like, it's you.
And I'm asking not as I was with nationalization, because I disagree, but because I don't know at all. Is there any evidence that a lot of these major trades are being done by sovereign nations as opposed to individuals, or...
So that's an excellent question. I think generally speaking, nobody knows that. I think the research around that has been very biased. I think the reason we know North Korea's activities is because everyone hates North Korea. I think the reason we know Iran's activities is because everyone hates Iran. Does everyone know the American government's activities? Absolutely not. Do people like Saudi Arabia is a huge player in crypto? Do we know all of their moves? Absolutely not. So you can guarantee that the governments who are playing in this space, and they are taking great measures to cover their activity, the way stock traders try to cover their activity. Because if you know someone's desires, you can manipulate the market. You can mess with it.
And back to where we started from, the very fact that the government is establishing a crypto reserve will encourage that kind of behavior because it adds authority and legitimacy and liquidity and trust to what otherwise is the Wild West.
Although I agree with everything you say in theory, but I'm of a family that anything Trump touches, we're not going to trust. So trust is a double-edged sword here. On the one hand, yes, this is giving the power of governments, the Trump government, to crypto, and it is the biggest thing ever in the crypto world. And this, to go to our point, the timing of this is not coincidental. The moment that the economy is going to be driven to shit, they make this powerful policy announcement that makes everyone who's holding crypto go, I'm feeling great. Oh, egg prices are going up. Who cares? Car prices going up. Who cares? And I know some of these guys. Like when Trump won, they were posting on LinkedIn their sheer joy of crypto wealth. Because, again, they got in at pennies and it's now worth hundreds of thousands. And these other currencies you mentioned, oh my God, the people who are riding the rocket on those currencies are currently having fantasies of wealth that capitalists only dream of, right? And so Solana, you wanted me to talk about what these were. And I sort of said it's hard for me to talk about them without getting into their politics, but I'll do so briefly. Ethereum is the computer language, the computing code.
Yes, so, that one I'm familiar with. There's the other three that I've never heard of.
Yeah, and the nerds love Ethereum. Solana is the meme coins. So, Melania.com and, Joe like any pop cult. So Solana is targeting the attention economy and the meme coins. And it's where the world of kind of grift and culture of rug pulls has been very rampant. And that's why Solana is part of it, because it is part of the grifters game. XRP is the corporate one. XRP, what got XRP on the list is it's American. and it's controlled by Americans. So where the American government is kind of concerned that China, for example, has a huge position in Bitcoin, and Saudi Arabia has a huge position in Bitcoin, and Russia has a huge position in Ethereum, XRP is American. If
You say it's corporate. What do you mean by that?
XRP is designed for corporate applications. XRP is designed for enterprise users. XRP is kind of Silicon Valley's infrastructure coin. I've always disregarded it. I always thought it was just lame. That it doesn't. There's no popularity to it, because to your point, popularity is everything, and this is why Solana is on the list, because it's popular. But XRP, it's the national security interest. It's the American controlled. It's the one on the list that America believes if everything goes to shit, it's the one that America can rely upon. I still don't understand why they feel that way, other than the fact that it is Americans who control it and its headquarters in America, and they're really trying to align themselves with America. But the point about all this crypto stuff is it's designed to not be controlled by governments. And that's the paradox of putting all this government trust, all this government capacity and resources into a highly risky investment, and where fundamentally governments don't have control. They have the policy to manipulate, because that's what we just saw. We saw governments using policy to manipulate cryptocurrency, but that's different than control. And that is what is, on the one hand, so reckless about this administration, but also arrogant, because they think that they control it. And this is why I say the two constituents are the wealthy and the tech nerds, because the tech nerds all have cryptocurrency and they're now all wealthy. Ha!
Having kind of admitted that I'm way over my head on this, I mean, the irony in what you're talking about is that, if one of the benefits of cryptocurrency from the people who developed it, promote it, is the absence of government involvement, the fact is that the only way that it has any enduring wealth is if the support of government. That is, if its value is backed by a reserve, as the government is suggesting right now. Whether that's a detraction to the original allure, given how much this now will protect the value of cryptocurrency, I don't know. I mean, I would think that, and again, if you begin to spell, you're talking about the wealthy class and the nerds, they'd be much more interested in a government-supported currency that has value than a non-government supported currency that may or may not have value, depending on the vagaries of the marketplace.
So on the one hand, that's why I think this is all going to go to shit. That's why I think these guys are arrogant. That's why I think they're wrong. That's why I think in the end, democracy is going to win, and this techno-fascism vision of whatever is going to fall apart. But that's where, politics abhors a vacuum. That's where perhaps when they say that cryptocurrency is beyond government control, they're actually mean beyond democratic control. That what they envision is a new kind of government, a libertarian form of government that is controlled by the rich, not so much the government itself. And that's where you get into Curtis Yarvin, who's a big cryptocurrency proponent, and all these, dark enlightenment types that again gets kind of twisted. But I fundamentally agree with your analysis and the paradox that these guys are entering or engaging with.
Well, and for me, the thing that really attracted my attention to this, because I've always ignored cryptocurrency, and I've ignored it not because it's difficult to understand, but in a fairly assiduous and studied way, because I've always believed that the central banks were going to, and it was only a matter of time, issue their own cryptocurrency that would be supported by a domestic reserve, and it would make these other currencies just dodo birds in a second. What's scary about this, and sorry, that premise was always based on an assumption that there's no government in the world other than Brazil or whoever's done it already, Uruguay or something,
China,
who would actually support a cryptocurrency that wasn't of their own making and therefore within their own control, until these knuckleheads in Washington did it yesterday. And so now you've got a whole different ball game. The support of a government for a currency that they didn't create, they don't control, and is, as you've noticed, kind of the Wild West with flippers and schemers and hackers and cheaters and grifters, running rampant throughout this landscape.
And, on the one hand, I said China because the paradox here is China did initially embrace Bitcoin. And they embraced Bitcoin partly because I don't think the CCP understood it. And there is such a profitable Bitcoin industry in China. Like there were so many Chinese industry, both companies doing mining, companies making technology for the miners, people who were doing cryptocurrency trading. Like there was a point in time in which the Chinese cryptocurrency ecosystem dominated all cryptocurrency across the world. And then the Chinese government said, wait a minute, we made a mistake. Under no circumstances are we going to allow this to continue. They completely cracked down. They created, to your point, a central bank digital currency, which has become very powerful. And they basically outlawed the entire Bitcoin industry. But because of the nature of the currency, many of those entrepreneurs, many of those Chinese nationals who were engaged still have those Bitcoins. Right? So they still have that cryptocurrency. They're still part of the marketplace. They're still engaged. They're quasi-illegal, right? Because the Chinese government is against it. Yeah. But it's global and it's international. So that is part of what changes the dynamic. And that was my point about XRP, which is called Ripple, and why it's part, because they are worried about the kind of, grassroots Chinese constituency within this cryptocurrency space. But the other side to this, fundamentally, that I think is worth mentioning is we are talking about software, right? Like when we talk about dollars, we're talking about literal currency in the form of my hand, and we're talking monetary policy in terms of a government that has laws. Software's different because it can be hacked, right? Software's different because it can have flaws. It can have changes, right? So there was this... it was when I was golfing, so I may even have told you about it. I don't know if you remember. But there was Ethereum had a crisis, an existential crisis, maybe 10 years ago, 8 years ago, in which they had a hack so big that a hacker basically compromised the entire currency. He could steal almost all of it, and he started to steal all of it. And the whole ethic of this world is there's no undos, there's no backsies. Right? If you lose your money, you lose your money. That's it. It's capitalism. But the entire community was so embarrassed that they actually rolled it back. They actually voted as a group to say the software that's out there now is now invalid. We are going to roll back to the previous version, which nullifies all the transactions that have happened
that occurred from the hack and beyond. Wow.
Yeah.
Who's they? Who would make that decision?
So then it was the Ethereum developers and the Ethereum miners. Now it would essentially be whoever holds the currency, because it is really $1, one vote.
But you describe them almost as a community. They vote.
Yeah, back then it was a tight-knit community, like a very tight-knit community, because it was still early days. But there were still enough dissidents who were like, this is immoral, you cannot do this. And so what happened is the currency split between what became Ethereum and then Ethereum Classic, right? And Ethereum Classic acknowledged the theft and kept going, and Ethereum Normal didn't. So imagine that as a political scenario where we could have Bitcoin having a hack in which Elon Musk gets robbed, and then the United States government says, we're going to undo it. We're going to champion Bitcoin version Trump, and we're going to undo all these transactions and go in this. Like, that is the power they have. And that is a ludicrous kind of arbitrary power, which, to your point, does have a governance mechanism, but it has a governance mechanism that is easily manipulated in a way that a central bank is not, in a way that a parliament or a Congress is not. So the governance mechanisms of this cryptocurrency are so fucking stupid that You made a great argument last time, which we clipped. It's actually getting some traction on TikTok, that his cabinet does not have the expertise to handle a real crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And these guys do not have the expertise to handle a real crypto crisis.
Yeah,
Right?
I got a headache already just listening
Yeah.
to
But
all of this. So it's clearly beyond the pale of the average schmo.
100%. But the most important thing for all of this, which I think a lot of people can understand and should understand, is crypto is a path for graft, right? If you are the regime and you are open to bribery and you want to tell the world, if you want to do business with America, great. Here's where you pay your deposit. Here's where you get a meeting with the man. They have just now created a technically secure means of funneling that money to whoever needs it, whether Musk, whether Trump, and telling the entire world we are open for business, and there is zero way, in present terms, that Congress can prove or oversee any of it. And that's why they did it, fundamentally, other than them already having a position and wanting to increase the price. This is why I'm expecting war, Allan. These guys are not the normal kind of people, and they got a lot of fucking power.
Your alarms are well struck. Whether they're realistic is a other issue. But
we can focus on optimism. I'm all for it.
No, but listen, when you and I talked about this this podcast and having our discussions, I mean, one of the things we both said is that there's enough, ideological straitjackets out there. There's enough of kind of regurgitating what happened in the New York Times this morning, which is what you hear on 99% of these podcasts, that we've got to be radical. We've got to explore alternatives that other people aren't talking about, even if right now they're not that realistic, to open people's minds to start thinking in a way that isn't traditional, because we're not in a traditional environment. And that I'm fully buying into and endorse.
But let me, for our last segment, our last little quick chat before we conclude today, let me bring up something that we've teased in the past, and I want to be a recurring thread. Because to your point, I think what you and I are doing within our intergenerational dynamic and vibe is we're actually flipping what is currently happening in society in the norm. And I say this anecdotally from what I'm seeing on social media, in that we keep talking about how MAGA has captured the radical essence, right? MAGA is the anti-establishment kind of force that when people who are frustrated with the status quo look to politics for an answer, MAGA offers them. Yeah. And I'm seeing more and more anecdotal data that's boomers. That boomers are that countercultural force that sees MAGA as the anti-establishment. And it's partly because I'm seeing all these dynamics where the younger guy is the sensible one and the boomer is the radical, only the boomer is the right-wing radical, and the Gen Xers trying to say, come on, that's nonsense. You got to be a little more mainstream. I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether boomers are this radical MAGA force.
I am a vulgar empiricist. I mean, I am a researcher, and I haven't done any research on this. So on one hand, I'm loath to even engage in something for which I don't have a solid database. I mean, what I do know is that boomers are far and away right now the most satisfied, and so therefore are not looking for any kind of radical alteration of the status quo. They're filthy rich as a consequence of real estate values in the Western world. I mean, we've talked about being on the precipice of what is going to be the largest generational transfer of wealth. And then something that researchers are never supposed to do, as a sample of one, I grew up in the Canadian prairies in the 50s and 60s, attended the United Church, smoked a tremendous amount of pot, had hair down to the middle of my back. I was a hippie, as were most of the people in my generation. Now, we got the shit kicked out of us in the 1970s by a number of events, and you saw a transformation from the hippies to the yuppies, and the whole Gordon Gekko thing was a reflection of that. But I mean, I look at peers in my generation, and they are rock rib liberals. They're not
Yeah.
conservative. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do some research on the research, and let's talk about this, because one of the things we have said, because it is very important right now, is the intergenerational differences have never been greater. I mean, we talked about the new dimensions of ideology, and one of them being optimism and pessimism. And me noting that there was a time when everyone was optimistic, because optimism was directed to the future, and the future was always better than today and the past to that. So there was no intergenerational difference. So you had no reason to have intergenerational tension, because everyone had essentially the same view. Today you have a massively different lived experience, which is at the root of polarization, ideological polarization. People believing that they're flourishing, treading water, or falling behind are the single best predictors of how they feel about politics and life, and what they're looking for from government. But those differences in lived experience also exist much, much more across generations than they have before. I'll shut up in 1 second. The one difference in proviso for that is, at the same time, is social iconography has shifted remarkably. And with it, the whole definition of what is young, what is old, what's acceptable, and what's unacceptable behavior has also shifted dramatically. And you see, there's samples of one, you'll see this, your relationship with your parents. My relationship with my adult children. I mean, I loved my parents, and my parents loved me. But after I was 12 years old, they had nothing to do with me. The notion I'd go over to their house and drink wine on a Sunday night or go on a vacation with them is, incomprehensible. So, and it's a very, very long preamble to say, I don't know. But I'm going to find out, because it's clearly there's enough anecdotal stuff out there to say this should be part of our conversation, and we should know more about it than I do.
Well, and I've been talking to my mom about this stuff, because she is kind of my North Star intellectually. That, I write for her and think for her and chatting. And she's absolutely pumped about her and I going to Tenerife together in a few weeks. So to your point, I'm very big into this kind of intergenerational relationship.
And they're old lefty hippies as well, because I remember your mom.
But and in fact, they prefer the term freak. Like, they are far left the way that I'm far left. They had the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers comics, which I used to read growing up. But did you not have anyone in your extended circle who and I hope the answer to this is no, who kind of was succumbed to the anti-vax or the anti-mask nonsense during the lockdown shit?
Not quite that far, but I do have a lot of friends, and this is where I think this is why I think your hypothesis is worth looking at. Friends who did start out as, in my generation, liberals, hippies, but now, because they are wealthy,
yes,
feel an obligation to protect that wealth, and that anything that threatens that wealth is something to be put down, which is why you have this bizarre situation where the wealthy, talking about welfare fraud. You go, stop me. Really?
Yeah, I know.
You're worried about people on welfare getting too many food stamps.
And I think you in your intuitive empirical sense, I think you identified two potential intersections that may be answering the question. One is wealth, and the other is cultural confusion or cultural alienation. And I say this because I feel, as we do this podcast, part of our work as researchers is to anticipate how we swing people back. On the one hand, we've identified working class voters as people who we believe can be swung back. I believe the boomers can be swung back. I believe at the core, and I say this because of the love of my parents, that the boomer MAGA constituency, with some exception, can be swung back, because there is an empathy, there is a kind of countercultural seed to their identity. And that's why I kind of want to understand it. I think part of it absolutely is wealth. I think part of it is not understanding the culture today. But that's why it's a thread I want us to continue to tease. Because to your point about wealth, we do need to get the boomers back, right? Well, we do need to disengage them from this regime.
There's also, at the risk of, eating myself here with contradictions, is that there also is, I can say this anecdotally, but with some certainty, a tremendous amount of confusion among the boomers right now. And if they have lived in the crosshair of societal attention and societal celebration their entire lives. And so Paul McCartney was a great big fucking hero when he was 17 years old, and he's still a great big fucking hero when he's 87 years old. That doesn't happen. 70 years of being in the cultural spotlight. But trust me, he wouldn't understand this conversation about cryptocurrency any better than I did. So for all of his sense of self-worth, all of his kind of look at me, I'm the center of the world, he's in many subjects are coming up. He's an idiot. He's a crank. And that runs completely contrary to my generation's self-image. Completely contrary.
Well, and there we have the two other ingredients: nostalgia and, you know, conservatism, right? Of wanting to go back, because I think we do need to, the same way we have to anticipate how the Democrats can come up with messaging and policies that win over the working class. I think the same has to be said for the boomers, and it has to be done in a way that is inviting and that is welcoming. Speaking of which, did you get a chance to watch? Doechii is this young, phenomenal artist who dominated the Grammys this year, and I sent you her Tiny Desk concert, which I sent to David, my dad.
And good for NPR. I mean, that is such a neat concept, and she is exceptional.
Did you see that?
And I've seen a lot of the Tiny Desk concerts.
And
I just, again, you know, growing up, when I did, you know, folk clubs and hootenannies, and they were small church basements. You would have people gathering and just kind of riffing and ripping it. So no, it was very good, and anyone who's bothering to follow our conversations would be well advised to take a look at it, because it's quite inspirational.
Well, and the reason I keep bringing up Doechii along with Kendrick Lamar is their lyricism is the opposite of the algorithm, and yet it's designed for the algorithm. And if we could imagine what the political equivalent would be, because Trump and his cohort are winning because their language is fundamentally tuned to the algorithm, I kind of wonder what would be the left-wing equivalent, what would be the Democratic equivalent, and that's my kind of cultural interest in Doechii and Kendrick Lamar. But analysis for another day. Any final thoughts?
No, it was a good conversation. I learned a lot.
Right on.
Front, and there's no shortage of stuff to watch, let me tell you.
It's going to be, I think, a crazy week. So we'll talk again on Wednesday.
Looking forward to it, my friend. Take care.
Right on. Okay, and we're on YouTube, TikTok, and all the audio podcasts. We'll see you there.